I think we're recording right now, but QuickTime just updated and changed the way they do it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Off to Tube, an AP European History. Today we have a special guest. My producer Avery is here to join us for this wonderful recording. So this is the hashtag working from home, which is a lot of fun. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been looking at the time period between 1648 and 1814. And this week, you're looking at the event that is seen as the cap of this time period. This time period that was originally marked as kind of two parallel developments within Europe. Number one, absolutism, this growth of the centralization of monarchies all across Europe, with rulers like Louis XIV and Peter the Great taking more control over their territories than they ever have. Then at the same time, seeing those intellectual movements of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment directly challenging that authority and kind of calling into question a lot of the ways that European society had traditionally been organized. And of course, we saw with enlightened despots some shifts and changes within the statecrafts of Europe, the way that European monarchs did statecraft. But we also see by the end of our time period that those two seemingly parallel developments that were in some cases working together are then in a giant collision course that culminates in the French Revolution. The French Revolution, this time where France is going to try and upend all of those things that had built European society up until that point. The French Revolution that was supposed to employ these Enlightenment values that had developed earlier in the time period to make a more perfect society. That's right, Avery, you should get excited about this, because that's what the French Revolution was supposed to do. And what's incredibly fascinating, as we watched in our documentary, is that by the end of the French Revolution, even the leaders of the revolution, the people who were leading this republic, who had worked hard to get rid of the monarchy and to the three estate system, they wind up employing a lot of the same tactics that Louis and other absolutist monarchs had before, and creating what is known in history as the Reign of Terror. Now, the Reign of Terror is eventually going to come to an end, especially as Robespierre then gets executed, and you see the Thermidorian reaction as the Directory tries to pick up the pieces and preserve the Republic. But with all the different factions of people who were A, scared of what happened in the terror, and B, also scared about what's going to happen if people restore a monarchy, and then, oh my gosh, we're also getting attacked by other European powers. There's all these issues that the Directory has to think about. And eventually, those factions are then going to cause an internal conflict that's going to be led by actually, it's going to start out as just a tool that will be used, but by at one point, a seemingly kind of insignificant person, a kind of middle-class Corsican who was sent to France, to French military school at a young age and was made fun of for his strange little kind of quasi-Italian French accent, and who contemplated and who had some pretty dark times when he was a kid because he wasn't very popular. But through the French Revolution, and especially through the raising of that kind of nationalist French army, Napoleon Bonaparte, formerly Buonaparte, but he wanted to seem more French, Napoleon Bonaparte is going to stage a coup and eventually take power over France. Now, Napoleon, and I know my daughter's adorable, but we're gonna take a second just to look at Napoleon here. Napoleon represents a fascinating figure in European history. And that's largely because his role in the French Revolution and the subsequent events is quite controversial. For some, and especially for Jacques-Louis David, who painted this glorious painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps, he is seen as the savior of France. He is the one that was going to end all of France's turmoil and not only brings peace and prosperity to France, but also makes France a dominant power within Europe as he starts to march these French armies all across and conquering places like Italy and in Germany and expanding French territory and influence. For others, he is seen as somebody who was radically trying to change European society and challenge the conservative order, also while disrupting that balance of power. So your second supplemental assignment is going to be looking at Napoleon, and specifically looking at the extent to which Napoleon is somebody who implements Enlightenment values. And we're going to be practicing DBQ skills here in most of our supplemental assignments. And what I did is I compiled a bunch of documents that I was able to find into a DBQ so that you could start practicing some of these skills. Now again, anytime you see a DBQ, it's always going to start with a page like this. This page has the directions on it. It gives you kind of how much time you should spend, and it also gives you this checklist of things that you need to do in an essay. So step 1 to doing a DBQ is always read through the directions. Step 2 is always to break down the prompt. So here's our prompt. Here's our prompt at the top of the page. It says, evaluate the extent to which Napoleon spread Enlightenment values from 1790 to 1815. Now, this is going to be largely from the French Revolution through his final days after he escapes off of Elba and goes to and reveals himself in France and starts the whole thing all over again in those 100 days that terrified the monarchs of Europe. But by 1815, that's going to be the end of his reign. And so we're really looking at to the extent to which Napoleon should be viewed as an extension of the French Revolution, the extension of the implementation of Enlightenment values, or to what extent was he not? And so we're looking at, again, an evaluate the extent prompt, and that always means that we need to say somewhat or mostly. So the intention of using these documents is to figure out, was Napoleon somewhat responsible for spreading Enlightenment values? Was he mostly responsible for spreading it? Or was he mostly or somewhat not responsible for doing that? So that's step 2. Step 3 is to brainstorm possible answers to the prompt. I mean, I just said a few of them there. One of the possible answers is that, yes, Napoleon was responsible for spreading Enlightenment values. And he is going to be doing things like setting up a law code that is universal, not just for the French, but any territories that he conquered. And in these law codes, there were Enlightenment values, such as the equality of all citizens, such as the rights to property, the freedom of press, sort of the freedom of speech, until he finds out people aren't saying nice things about him. You might find that the documents are going to say that he spreads Enlightenment values by conquering other territories and sharing the Enlightenment values of the French Revolution with the people that were formerly subjugated under absolutist authority. You might say that he somewhat did not, because he tries to conquer and subjugate Europe. And he does so at the same time while crowning himself emperor. He even has the Pope crown him emperor, just like Charlemagne did. And when he institutes his Code Napoleon, he's trying to make himself seem more like the Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Emperor. He saw himself as a continuation of Roman traditions. And so you see him kind of taking power for himself. You might find that Napoleon is going to largely do what normal monarchs do. He's going to put his siblings in power in other places, and he's going to exert authority from the top down. He's going to eventually name himself, like I said, emperor, and he is going to be the person who makes all of the final decisions for France. So these are all just possible answers to what the DBQ could be. So step 1, read the directions. Step 2, break down the prompt. Step 3, brainstorm possible answers. Then you're ready to actually go through and read the documents. And when you go through and read the documents, you want to go around the horn. At the top, you want to figure out how the document answers the question. On the left-hand side, that's when you start doing your hipping. You start figuring out what the historical context is, what the intended audience, what the point of view, what the purpose is. On the bottom, any outside information that helps to prove the same argument that you found up there but isn't found in the document. And then on the right-hand side, that's where you start to figure out how these documents work together. Now, for the sake of this assignment, I'm less worried about you going around the horn and more kind of the document analysis sections that you are going to be doing towards the end. Again, I want you to practice doing things. That are going to help you write your DBQ essay eventually. Now, you're not going to actually write the essay, but here's what I want you to do. What I went and did is I gave you documents that I think work together to answer the prompt. So I think documents 7, 5, 1, and 2 make a really good somewhat argument. So I want you to read through those documents and figure out how they answer the question in a similar way. And I want you to write the argument here. Same thing is what I want you to do for the mostly argument. I think documents 3, 4, and 6, and then also 5, 7, and 1 you could also use, I think. But 3, 4, and 6 definitely work together to prove a mostly argument. So I want you to figure out how these documents work together and tell me what you think the argument is. Again, we're practicing kind of what's called, after you read through the documents, step 5 is grouping the documents. And this is what I mean by grouping. And these would then turn into your two paragraphs for your essay. Right? Your argument would be this, and the evidence that you would use would be from these documents. Your argument would be this, and the evidence would be from these documents. So again, I'm having you practice that. The second thing I want you to start practicing is doing what I call a hip check. This is where the College Board, this is one of the ways that you get the analysis and reasoning points for the College Board. In order to do a hip check, you have to explain how the historical context, intended audience, point of view, or purpose is relevant to your argument. So I want you to choose two of the documents. It could be any of the two that you want. And I'd like you to write a hip check statement for those documents, explaining how one of those things, either the historical context, intended audience, or point of view, or purpose, is relevant to your argument. So here's my sample hip check for you. And I did it on document 4, so obviously, well, I guess you could do document 4, just don't use point of view. But here it goes. The point of view of document 4 is relevant. Notice how I'm smacking the reader in the face, right? I'm making it super easy and saying, hey, I'm doing the analysis and reasoning point here. Please give me this point. The point of view of document 4 is relevant because it comes from a British perspective. I've kind of identified what the point of view is there, and I got that, by the way, by simply just reading the source. I didn't do a crazy major analysis, I just literally read what it said in the sourcing. I know, Avery, I hear you, girl. Then I go to explain why or how it is relevant. The British viewed Napoleon's rise to power as a challenge to their hegemony in both global trade and also in Western Europe. Therefore, they were quick to portray Napoleon as a power-hungry tyrant bent on upsetting the balance of power in Europe. So that was my argument for him mostly not being enlightened, because he's essentially just a power-hungry, crazy guy who's trying to conquer Europe. And you can see that in this document here. He's literally trying to swallow the entire world. And the British are quick to portray him as that because of the fact that they saw his rise as a challenge to their power. That's how it is relevant. Now, obviously, I need to go help out my daughter, but that concludes my video anyway. This is what I'm going to be looking at with your supplemental assignment. Till next time, off the doll, out. Or off the dolls, out.